Productive Pastor 83, planning a year of sermons. Welcome back, friends. Productive Pastor. December, y'all. I'm stoked about December. I love the holidays. It's a fantastic time of the year. But as I said today in my Productive Pastor weekly email, you can sign up for that in the show notes, by the way, revchadbrooks.com/PPP/083. I talked about how I'm a Monday person, and because I'm a Monday person, I think that means I'm a New Year person. I love to think about planning. I love to make plans. All those sorts of things just are my jam. As I talked about y'all in the last episode, we're going to do some yearly planning emphasis stuff over the next couple of weeks. And today's talking about how you plan out a year of sermons. If you missed last episode, episode 82, it's about how to plan a year of ministry. Go back in the show notes, grab that link, or wherever you listen to podcasts, listen to that. But before we jump into stuff, real quick, on Monday, December 11th at 1 p.m. Central, I've got a workshop going on that's all about planning out the ministry year. It's going to be for 2 hours. We're going to do some work together, going to sprint together, going to try to accomplish as much as we think we might need to for next year together. Got some templates for you to use, got a Trello template for you to use, got some other worksheets, some kind of things like that, some resources for project management, all that kind of stuff. $25. Would love to see you on there. You can find the link to get that in the show notes or just wherever else you hear me talk about things on the internet. So we're going to just kind of, finish that stuff off, and we're going to get straight into the primary content for this episode. How do you plan a year of sermons? Now, there are a few related posts I want to let you know about. Episode 43 is called 3 Key Sermon Preparation Systems, and I talk about a lot of those things inside of this episode. So that might be a way to click over and learn some more. Also, episode 30, Preaching Islands. I'm going to talk more about preaching islands in this episode, but I think that's an important idea or a concept to think about, especially when you are planning out an entire year worth of preaching. Now, I think I did a whole month of these about talking about this in the Productive Pastor email account, about sermon calendars, that sort of stuff. So I'm not going to go too much in depth because I've got a handful of things that I think are different, the way and the reason behind this for me. But one of the reasons has to do with those sermon islands, that whole idea of preaching islands, which are this. A preaching island is when you have an idea or an interest or something you want to talk about that is divorced from the mainland mission of your local church. These might be sermons that you preached and you probably should have asked yourself the Jurassic Park question beforehand. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. That sort of stuff. And I feel like looking at this sort of idea of a sermon preparation and planning an entire year in this way, it actually helps you stay off of islands. It also helps you realize when you might be going back to some of the same things over and over and over. So if you've never done this before, you could probably sit down and take a couple of hours this year and think through this. If you've done this before, or you're maybe an old hat at this type of strategy, think about how you might be able to go a little bit deeper into things more. So we're going to just kind of get straight into this. It's not going to be a long episode today, just talking about how to plan out a year of sermons. And so I'm going to assume a couple of things are going on beforehand. I'm going to assume that you've got some sort of dumping ground. It's one of my favorite things to talk about with Productive Pastor. I'm assuming that you have some sort of dumping ground already, that you are at least keeping ideas in, that you are saying, hey, as the year goes by and you're realizing, that might be something interesting to preach on, or you might be reading a book, or you might have been journaling in your devotions during the morning and realize, hey, that might be a good thing to think about preaching. That might be interesting. I'm going to write this down somewhere. So I'm going to assume you've got some sort of dumping ground strategy to help you with your sermon planning. If not, I'll tell you right there, that's one of those 3 key sermon preparation systems I'll talk about, is you've got to have a way to drop down these ideas, some sort of a capture system to think about this. I'm assuming that. The second thing I'm assuming is that you want your preaching to connect with the congregation. And it sounds so silly that I'm saying that, but as I work with people in coaching, a lot of times when someone says, hey, I want to get my preaching better, they're not necessarily talking about the actual act of preaching. What they're saying is, I want my preaching to have a very specific missional role inside of my congregation. That goes back to one of my favorite questions to ask about preaching. What is the role of the sermon in your context? And just the way you answer that will tell you a lot, will teach you a lot. So those are the kind of assumptions that I have coming into this. And so we're going to make a handful of lists. If you not notice, all of these sorts of planning things with me begin with, let's make a handful of lists. So the first one is this. List out the major days that are happening on Sunday. Now think about, where is Easter Sunday? Write that down. Where is the first Sunday of Advent for 2024? Write that down. Where is Mother's Day? Where is Father's Day? Make sure you notate when Labor Day is, when Memorial Day weekend, when the first Sunday of Lent, when is Ash Wednesday, all of these sorts of days. And some of these are going to be sacred, like we talked about Christmas and Easter. But some of them are going to be secular. Some are just going to be realizing, like, hey, everybody seems to be absolutely gone the second and third weeks of July where I leave. You might just want to write that down and be like, these are light weeks. Like, nobody is really there that much. And what you're doing right now is you're kind of broadly defining the rhythm that you're going to have to stick to by just laying out one of these major Sundays that you can do nothing about. And that's probably the best filter right there. These Sundays you can do nothing about. Now let's talk about sermon series or sermon ideas. If you might be an expository preacher, you might be a lectionary preacher, you might be a thematic preacher, any of those sorts of things. What you now have is a basic calendar. I'm going to talk about how to lay that calendar out on the second part of this. Well, you got a basic calendar. You get out a big, huge sheet of paper or get on a whiteboard, something like that. You've got a basic idea of the boundaries of what are going on. So if you're a lectionary and you're only a lectionary, what I would encourage you to do is now to pull out the Revised Common Lectionary for this liturgical year and look through what those passages are. Because what you might be realizing is, hey, I've got the ability to jump back and forth between Old Testament and New Testament and an epistle, that sort of piece. Like, that's my own kind of private rhythm I have right now, is I am loving making sure in a major way I'm covering New Testament content, epistle content, and Old Testament content throughout the year, and I'm interdispersing that with stuff from the writings. That's what I choose to do. But if you're in a liturgical system, get into the Revised Common Lectionary and realize, what are the big places of text I can do. If you just preach the gospel passage every single Sunday, well, then, this episode might be a struggle bus for you. But that sort of thing. Start looking at the Revised Common Lectionary and pull out the big, huge themes that it's telling it. If you're a sermon series preacher, what I would encourage you to do is to think about series in terms of this. What I call them major series and miniseries. Think about that. I remember when I first started preaching every single week, I realized how awkward it would look to start a new sermon series on the first Sunday of every month. And I still see this happen in churches. I still see this happen. All this is awkward. This is weird. This also, doesn't pay attention to the calendar, that sort of a thing. I love to think about major series and mini series. So a major series, you do these certain times of the year. You can probably do 2 or 3 of these. This is when something is highly invitational, when it is a time to be evangelistic, when it is a time for you to, if you're in a contemporary or a modern church, if y'all do sermon bumpers and videos, that kind of things, or you film videos inviting people to come to church in special ways, these major series are the series to do all of this work in. But these series themselves need to be incredibly evangelistic. It's like you're putting all this energy and effort towards things that are going to be major, and you can't run at that tempo all throughout the year. A mini series is something you say, hey, this is going to be a sermon series. And you can define that all sorts of different ways, but you're not just going to go full tilt boogie here. You might do a quick little invite video on your phone rather than hauling out the big camera or hiring an editor, having that done. You might not do invite cards for this. Also, there's something about realizing that, mini series are how you maybe build theological building blocks to a larger goal that might take 2 or 3 years for your church to accomplish. Major series can stand alone outside of themselves. These mini series have all sorts of ways you can be strategic with what you have going on. And if you're an expository preacher, you might have a book that you're just going to go through for the entire year. Or you might be doing smaller books, or you might decide to break it up 2 or 3 times a year. But regardless of what you want to do, if you're thinking in any sort of a series in the broadest sense, getting out that piece of paper and writing down all of the ideas and then asking yourself the question, how long is this going to take? Saying, I want to preach on on Matthew 5, 6, and 7, on the Sermon on the Mount. How long is that going to take? And you kind of pull into the pericopes and realize, okay, this is going to take 10 weeks. Or saying, I want to preach through the book of 1 Peter, and I've got these ideas, and preaching through 1 Peter is going to take me 4 weeks. Or saying, I want to preach a series about relationships and love, and I've got all these ideas I've collected from across Scripture, and it's going to take 6 weeks. That's the thing, is the more you can then start kind of building block how many weeks your series is going to take, is going to really help you fill in the gaps in that larger calendar. You also realize, hey, I'm doing a series on relationships. It's going to take 3 weeks. That fits perfectly into February. I can take advantage of Valentine's Day and just the cultural milieu that is. That is fantastic. It's going to fit right there. If you want to do 16 weeks on First Chronicles, doing that in the summer might be hard because you're going to get broken up by Mother's Day, Memorial Day, Father's Day, and Labor Day. And so you think through this idea of how long is this going to take, and then you kind of begin to start massaging these series into the calendar year. What you can also do is begin asking yourself, remember going back to those mini-series, this idea of building blocks, saying, okay, what progression might I need to have this year in my preaching? What might be the way that I need to order things in order to help people understand stuff? So you think through that. So right there, you have that big whiteboard. You've got that calendar. You're kind of sticking through things and thinking through how things might fit in the easiest way possible. Now, you're also going to have standalone days. Standalone days where there's not a series, or there might be 2 weeks if there's not a series. And I would tell you to avoid the temptation to launch into a series there. Instead, think about, maybe what does it mean for me to preach something from the Psalms 5 or 6 times this year? Or what does it mean for me to go into the prophet Isaiah? Or maybe those are the Sundays that you offer your pulpit up to somebody else in the church. Think about that. And so what you have going on is by now you've got a list of sermons that you want to preach. You have a calendar that's in front of you, and you have your major days, these kind of block-off zones that you need to think about. You've got that there. And so now it's just a matter of playing mix and match and getting those sermons into the best place they can in the calendar in order for just to follow the cultural pattern of the year, but also maybe to follow a hopeful theological pattern of the year. That's huge. It's a great way to just kind of step back and begin to realize this. Now, where do you do this? How do you do this? Now, I start this off on a whiteboard almost every time. A whiteboard and sticky notes is where I begin thinking about this. I also used to have this sheet, and I can't even find a blank copy of it anymore. My friend D. Merrick's on social media in the last couple of weeks shared himself doing this at a whiteboard, and I laughed. I was like, I used to do that. And he said, I got that idea from you. I just would draw a big, huge circle on a whiteboard, like in the shape of a clock, and would think through the sermon's year like that because I wanted to visualize it. Now I do this on Trello, surprise, surprise. But it's one of the visual use cases of this, and I plan out my yearly preaching on Trello once I have these kind of big blocks in for the year done. But I think that even if you're an Excel spreadsheet kind of person, or you want to drop this into Notion or one of those other project management tools, I think for you to do your broad planning in a visual way will help you map out these things well. So I promise you a really simple, easy episode today. And hopefully you're realizing you're getting it. Because, this is pretty simple. Simple as it goes. But that's one of the ways I love to plan out a year of sermons. And I'll be honest with you, y'all, I'm working on this right now. I'm going through my notebook. I'm going through my journals. I'm going through my Bibles of every single thing that I've been thinking about and praying through the year. And also kind of flipping through some of the books that just theologically impacted me the most in my own practices this year. And I'm looking for that green tag because I put a green tag in a book when I think it applies to preaching. So I'm in my, hoarding the cats in my dumping ground phase together, but thinking about next year's preaching. But if you want to come on and talk about next year's planning, what does it mean for you to develop those systems and those habits? I would love to have you drop onto that workshop. Remember, the link to purchase that's in the show note, $25 for 2 hours of work. Great deal, and I would love to see you have, the most strategically effective but also healthy ministry year you can in 2024. So Till next episode, I'm Chad Brooks. I will see you back. Thanks for tuning in to The Productive Pastor. Come hang out on Facebook in the Productive Pastor community, the Productivity Party, with over 1,000 other ministry leaders thinking about healthy ministry through strategic productivity. See you next time.